Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and someone who I haven't talked about in a while is Ken Wheeler. And so some people might be wondering, well, who is Ken Wheeler? And the answer to that is, well, he's got a few titles actually. Some people have called him the Angry Photographer because he has talked about camera lenses and he got angry, I think. I haven't seen much of that. Another title that he's got is the Tattooed Buddha because he's talked about Buddhism a lot, he's got quite a few tattoos, and he kind of resembles Buddha. And to me, I see him as the word salad chef. Now, that probably isn't going to catch on too much, but it makes sense. The amount of times he's been saying word salad and it involves counter space is a lot of times.
But in the case of a point source object, that being a magnet, which is qualitative, not quantitative, the hyperboloidal geometry of that mass is one thing, which is no different than a dendritic discharge. Lightning is a desaturation and dendritic discharge into counter space.
Now, I've received a lot of people who have criticised my criticisms of Ken Wheeler because I have said that a lot of what Ken Wheeler says is word salad. And their argument is, well, it's not word salad, you just don't understand it. And they have a point to an extent, because some people will say that the things that I say are word salad, but I don't think that anything that I have said is word salad. I try to explain myself as best as I can. It's just that some people might not understand that. And whilst thinking about this, I realised one of the ways in which Ken Wheeler gets people to think that he's onto something, whilst not being onto anything. Though, I wonder if he's on anything. So the main question of this video is going to be, why do Ken Wheeler fans actually believe that Ken Wheeler's word salad is valuable, with a sort of sub-question of, how do you actually identify word salad? So let's start with, how do you actually identify word salad? And there's a few ways that you can do that, and some of them are pretty bad. Obviously there's the I don't understand it, therefore it must be word salad approach. And the problem with that one is that you can just not make any effort to understand anything, then you just get to call everything word salad. This also means that whether something is word salad or not differs from person to person. One person might be able to understand it, but another person might not be. Not a good metric. For example, I could talk about programming, and there will be a lot of people that wouldn't understand me, but the programmers would. Like if I say, I prefer strongly typed variables over weakly typed variables because that gives me control over the exact data type that I'm using, and it means that I get no precision loss if I'm dealing with huge integers, then a lot of people won't understand that, but I'm sure that most of the programmers will. Now, the next metric that you can use, and it is a very useful metric for determining word salad, is, do experts in the field understand this? Now, this makes sense because if anybody is going to understand something, it is going to be someone who is an expert, not just some random person. So if you're saying something and someone who is an expert is going, what the bloody hell are you on about? Then it might be that you don't actually know what you're talking about and all that you're saying is word salad. However, there are a few problems with this. And that is, what if you can't trust the experts? What if the experts aren't as smart as you might initially think? For example, what if you had a homeopathic practitioner who is trying to sell a homeopathic remedy and is just using word salad to promote it, and all the other homeopath expert people say, yep, I completely understand what this person is on about. Of course, these people can have biases, especially if we're talking about a field like homeopathy, which, you know, isn't exactly based on science. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying don't trust experts. If someone is an expert on something, then they're probably going to have a valuable opinion to give. What I am saying is that sometimes certain types of experts, you probably shouldn't take their word as gospel. Anyway, a better way of determining whether something is word salad is to work out if the words that are being used can be removed or replaced with words that people are more familiar with without detracting from the overall message, i.e., it can be simplified. Now, some people might say, aha, I see what you did there, and no, I didn't do the thing that you think I did. When I said, i.e., it can be simplified, that does remove some details, like the fact that you can simplify something to the point where it actually detracts from what you're trying to convey. For an example of this, well, I just gave one. Anyway, there are a few caveats that we need to throw in here, like just because something has words that can can be simplified doesn't automatically categorize it as word salad. It is only when the words that are being used make it difficult to pass out the message does it become word salad. Now you might say, wait, you just brought in subjectivity again, and subjectivity, as we've already discussed, is a bad way of measuring whether something is word salad, right? However, I would argue that there is a difference here. Previously we were saying, well, if it's difficult to understand, then it's word salad, which is completely subjective. The difference here is that that is not the primary question. The primary question is, can it be simplified without detracting from the message? If the answer is yes, then you can ask that question. Also, when we use this criteria, you actually do have to understand what is being said. You can't just go, oh, I don't understand it, so therefore it's word salad, because how would you know that something can be simplified if you don't understand it? Anyway, with this, can what Ken Wheeler says be simplified without detracting from the message? Yeah, it can be. I understand him enough that I know that it can be. Take, for example, this phrase.
Gravity is not an autonomous field modality.
Can that phrase be simplified? Yes, it absolutely can, if the words mean what they conventionally mean. A simplified way of saying that phrase is that gravity is not its own thing with its own field independent of something like magnetism. Now personally, I think that using the term autonomous field modality makes it a lot more difficult to understand than it otherwise would have been, especially given that I do not think that the term modality is adding anything useful to that. You could just as well say gravity is not an autonomous field, and I would understand it better. At least then I'm not trying to decipher how the bloody hell does modality fit into this. Now the problem that using word salad like this leads to is that it makes things more ambiguous than they need to be. But there is still something that we need to talk about, so put a pin in that. So another form of word salad is when you use words in your own way that people generally don't use them in, or better yet, you make up your own words. So yes, this does include words like counterspace. Now it is fine to make up your own words, make up your own terms, or even take existing terms and use them in a different way, as long as you explain what you mean by that. I should be able to look at your definition of a word and go, okay, so when they say this word, this is what they mean. I don't get that with Ken Wheeler. For example, let's take a look at the definition that he gives for counterspace, which says, see ether/aether, also accurately called the ether realm, 0-point energy/realm, or simply the ether/aether, the realm of pure potential or unmanifest energy of which, by which, and from which nothing is possible or even theoretically potential without same. Counterspace is the null point opposite to Cartesian forms, masses, magnitudes, and phenomena. There are only two dimensions in nature, spatial and counterspatial, or more accurately, dimensional and non-dimensional. Ether modalities are only so known by the fact that they are torsional or circular, dielectric, and magnetic. I have read over that several times. Every time I do read over that, I get a different idea of what the term counterspace means. That is not a good definition if people can do that. But remember what I said earlier about making things more ambiguous than they need to be. This does it. This is just an ambiguous definition that it's really hard to pin down what it's actually supposed to mean, which makes it more believable to some people. So there is this idea called the suspension of disbelief that is often applied to when someone is reading something like fiction or even watching a fictional movie. Yes, this does have a point, I promise. So when you're reading a book or watching a movie, quite often things that happen in that are things that don't really make a whole lot of sense. A good example of this is Harry Potter. A lot of things in Harry Potter don't really make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. Fortunately, if you just read the books, then you don't have to think about it a whole lot. You can basically suspend your disbelief and not have to think about it later on. However, when certain things get explained, it becomes more difficult to suspend your disbelief. This is because if you do not answer a question, then the audience can just go, okay, I think that's how it works, and move on. If you answer a question, then that's the answer that they've got to accept for that question. And that answer may raise more questions. To use Harry Potter as an example, in the books you're introduced to 3 different wizarding schools, so you kind of just assume that other parts of the world will have their own wizarding schools, and it's up to your imagination to think what those might be like. However, J.K. Rowling thought, imagination, well, that's not what my books are about, and decided to just list off all the wizarding schools around the world. Unfortunately, she didn't put a whole lot of thought into it. This means that despite people having a more concrete answer to a question that they may not have even had, it was now a concrete answer that made even less sense than them just using their imagination. An example where the writers did not make this mistake is when they gave Tony Stark magical powers in Infinity War. However, what they did is they explained these magical powers with a simple word: nanotech. They don't have to go into depth and explain all the finer details of it because it's not real. It's just nanotech. What are you going to do? If people don't find it believable, then they're free to add their own interpretation of how it works, and the reason being is because it's ambiguous. We do this all the time for fiction, except most of the time people realise that the fiction is fiction. When it comes to Ken Wheeler, a lot of what he says has a lot of ambiguity, so you can kind of just take your own ideas and impose them on what Ken Wheeler is saying. Of course, there are some rules, like if you accept relativity, then you're not going to be able to make it work very well. Now, something that I see a lot of Ken Wheeler fans talking about is how his knowledge is so useful and he's going to revolutionize physics or something. However, there's a bit of a problem with that. Let me ask a question to any Ken Wheeler fan that has made it this far through the video. What can you actually do with his physics knowledge? Because with quantum mechanics and general relativity, you can do quite a bit. The transistor, for example, operates on quantum mechanics. You've also got things like quantum computers, which take advantage of things like quantum mechanics. If you want to say that quantum mechanics is fake, then how do these computers work? But more importantly, what can you do with Ken Wheeler's physics knowledge? I have not seen a single application of it. The only example that someone might give is a ferrocell, but that's due to a misunderstanding of how the ferrocell actually works and what the ferrocell actually shows. By the way, if someone wants to send me a ferrocell so that I can take a look at it and possibly even have some fun with it, P.O. Box 6173 North Dunedin, postcode 9059, New Zealand. Hold on, does this mean that I'm going to get my P.O. Box just flooded with ferrocells? Okay, before you try to send me a ferrocell, check the comments. If there is a pinned comment that is talking about sending me a ferrocell, then that means that a ferrocell has been sent. And if I have a pinned comment talking about how I've received a ferrocell, then, you know, that means that I've received a ferrocell and you do not need to send me a ferrocell. Also, if you can, try to make sure it's delivered with NZ Post and not Courier Post, because otherwise there can be issues. And if you're wondering why I don't just make one, I'm not great with making things that involve physical items. It's not exactly a forte of mine. Anyway, if you want to cite the ferrocell, well, firstly, it doesn't show magnetic field lines like Ken Wheeler claims it does. But also, it isn't really all that useful, it's just some pretty lines. Like, make something using Ken Wheeler's framework. It should be easy to do if his framework is correct. Otherwise, it's useless in any practical sense and doesn't really explain how the universe works. But there is more to what actually convinces people that Ken Wheeler is right. Because not everyone is just going to start imposing their own view of how things work on Ken Wheeler's framework. Like, I'm not going to do that, mainly because I take everything that Ken Wheeler says with a large dose of skepticism. However, one way to get people on board with your ideas is to confirm their biases. If you start rambling about how the lizard people are real, then nobody's going to believe you. But if you, for example, say, Mark Zuckerberg looks really suspicious whenever he does literally anything, then people are more likely to agree with you because not a lot of people like Mark Zuckerberg. By saying that, you then have an avenue to say that the lizard people are real because you can just point to Mark Zuckerberg and go, he's not human, he's clearly a lizard person. And some people will take that as a joke, but there will be some people that will take that seriously simply because they don't like Mark Zuckerberg. In fact, I think there's probably a lot of people that will meme about Mark Zuckerberg being a lizard person. Now, how does Ken Wheeler confirm people's biases? Well, he plays to conspiracy theorists, people that generally don't trust scientists.
Isn't it wonderful you don't need a PhD of a professor of physics who gets it wrong? Those are the people who literally said, literally, gravity is the emission of negative momentum gluons. On the level. That is crazy talk. That's not me saying that, that is them saying it.
If you're someone who doesn't trust scientists, then upon hearing something like that, you're going to be more on board with what Ken Wheeler has to say than if you're someone like me who hears that and goes, that's just wrong. And just to be clear, he is wrong there, because I Google searched for the term negative momentum gluons in that particular order, and there were no results at all. It said, try searching without the quotes. So no, Ken, they did not literally say that. You are literally wrong. I did have to say something like that, by the way, because otherwise people would say, you don't actually have any arguments about why Ken Wheeler is wrong, and that's why you're attacking his character and not his arguments. Look, I've attacked his arguments a lot, and people just say, oh, you don't understand them. And then they want me to go and watch a whole bunch of Ken Wheeler's videos, and I've watched a lot of them at this point. I know what his tactics are, I know how he ropes people in, it's just the same old stuff. Like, here's the thing, I am used to dealing with flat earthers, and you know what I see when I see a Ken Wheeler video? I see the exact same tactics that flat earthers use, just in a slightly more sophisticated way. Distrust of scientists? You got that. Having ill-defined words where people can just project their own meaning onto it? You got that. For flat earthers, it's perspective. Lying about what their opposition says? Flat earthers do that all the time. Dismissing gravity by saying that it's something like magnetism? Well, not all flat earthers say that, but a number of them do. Being fans of Ken Wheeler? You'd be surprised that there's a number of his fans who are actually flat earthers.
Ball. Sphere. Ball. 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 I'm repeating the word ball for certain people out there that don't want me to say that word. Ball. Sphere. Guess who I'm talking about?
There are a number of similarities that I could come up with. Like, sure, Ken Wheeler is not a flat earther, but he is flat earth adjacent, hence why a lot of flat earthers watch him. Though I have also seen flat earthers criticize him, some unsuccessful like Nathan Oakley, but there is another one which we might take a look at in the future. Anyway, there are a number of reasons why I don't trust what Ken Wheeler has to say, and there are a lot of people who will listen to Ken Wheeler, hear what he has to say, and go, I think that must be correct, without realizing that they may have their own biases which lead them to give more weight to what Ken Wheeler is saying. And then when they hear someone like me disagree with that, they think that I must be wrong, or that I don't have any proper arguments, because I am not going to play to their biases because I don't agree with their biases. But here's some food for thought. I don't shy away from criticisms. You want to criticize me? Go right ahead. The only thing that might be standing in your way is the spam and offensive comments filter. However, Ken Wheeler, despite having the appearance of a thick-skinned individual, turns out to actually be very, very thin-skinned. He has even blocked me for criticizing him. For a while, I was trying to access his definition list, and I couldn't actually access it because my account was blocked. I finally worked out the issue recently when I decided to look at the document, and for some reason it automatically changed me to my backup email rather than my main email. So yeah, he's pretty thin-skinned, and when people tend to be that thin-skinned, they tend to not be able to defend their ideas that well. I'm not the only person that he's blocked, by the way. He has blocked other people for disagreeing with him, and you know, if that's his response to someone questioning his ideas and disagreeing, I don't think that his ideas really hold up that well. Think about it. Induction.
Induction, induction. Induction, induction. Induction, induction. Ball, induction, sphere, induction, ball, sphere, ball, induction, sphere, induction, ball, sphere, ball, induction, sphere, induction, ball, sphere, ball, induction, ball, induction, weir, 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 weir. Ball, induction, sphere, induction, ball, sphere, ball, induction, sphere, induction, ball, sphere, ball, induction, sphere, induction, ball, sphere, ball, induction, sphere, induction, ball, sphere. Gravity is not an autonomous field modality.
The fuck did you just say?
Ball, induction, sphere, induction.